Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Peepo, who was extremely excited about this video. Why? Because we're talking about Lou Harrison's Solstice, and Harrison was a composer who liked to write in alternate tuning systems, and Peepo here hates equal temperament. She really does. She's a cat. She has very, very sensitive hearing. And Harrison liked to write a lot of pieces in just intonation. That means that he uses intervals that are whole number functional fractions of each other. And while I wouldn't say that she's all that big in mathematics, Peepo loves just intonation. She also hates vibrato, which is really kind of disturbing because how could I live with a pet that hates vibrato? I don't understand it. But when I play string music with lots of vibrato, she runs away and hides. She loves other kinds of music. Like I said, she's an R&B cat, but just intonation does it. And when I said I was going to do a talk about Lou Harrison, here she is. She showed up with delight to join in on the fun, didn't you? All right, sweetie. I know you can go. She also wants breakfast, which is actually more important. She likes fancy feast more than she likes just intonation. So there's not much I can do about that. But we're going to talk about one specific work by Lou Harrison to start with, and that's his ballet Solstice. I think Solstice is sort of like, I don't know, it's a new age Ravel's Mother Goose. let's say. It has that same sense of magic, that sense of wonder, the wide-eyed innocence. I'm going to play you a couple samples of it. You'll see exactly what I mean. The music is incredibly haunting and incredibly beautiful, imaginative, and I'm not sure what intonation it's using. All I know is that Peepo likes it, and if Peepo likes it, it has to be good. Now, what is Solstice, you may ask? Solstice was a ballet. It was composed in 1949-1950, and it's actually the second piece of music that was written for the same choreography. The ballet originally was a bomb. I have no idea who wrote the original music for it. Maybe one of you folks do. But the story is it's a typical ballet thing. I hate to tell you, ballet plots are not the most sophisticated. It's the conflict between winter and summer. Summer is represented by a lion, the sun lion, and winter is represented by the moon bull. And really, that's about all you need to know about Solstice in terms of plot. And it has a bunch of sections. It lasts about 26 minutes in total. But the thing that you really need to know is, where do you get Solstice? How do you find it? Originally, I've got all of the discs here, all of the Solstices here, and it's only really been recorded twice, but the original version of it came out on Music Masters. This is what that disc looked like with Dennis Russell Davies. And this is gone. This is Music Masters' history, but the performance lived on. It is now available, so I should have taken all these out in advance, I suppose, on New World, on this superb disc called Lou Harrison in Retrospect. This is the same version of Solstice that was on Music Masters. You can also get excerpts of it on an old Argo disc, now that Argo no longer exists. That's this one that had the Fourth Symphony and some other things with it. And there you only got excerpts. It's missing about 10 minutes of the ballet. And since it's only about 25 minutes long, why would you want to miss 10 minutes? There isn't any junk in the ballet. There aren't any dead spots. There's no, non-essential music. So, the Argo CD is worth having for the Fourth Symphony, but it's not worth having for Solstice. So if you're going to get Solstice, the one you need to get is this one on New World, called Lou Harrison in Retrospect. And this is where the samples will be played, and you'll hear it that way. So that clears up, I think, that little conundrum. Now, the fascinating thing about Solstice is that it's actually composed as an octet. but an octet for a very, very unusual selection of instruments. And that's what makes it so wonderful. I mean, absolutely wonderful. The instrumentation of the octet is flute, oboe, trumpet, two cellos, a double bass, a celesta, and a tack piano. Now, a tack piano is a regular piano in which thumbtacks have been inserted into the hammers, the felt of the hammers, and it gives the piano a jangly, sort of quasi-harpsichord-like tone. And in the 1940s, harpsichords weren't so easy to come by, and so this was one of the tricks that you could use to approximate that kind of sound. When I was in high school, we used to do it with a grand piano, not with thumbtacks. They would have killed us. In the student lounge, we used empty aluminum soda cans that we would lay across the strings. You get an equal sort of barroom, honky-tonk, jangly kind of sound, which is quite wonderful, and you'll hear a little bit of it in the sample that I'm going to play you. Now, the different sections give us some sort of sense of this conflict, as I said, between summer and winter. And it begins with the Garden of the Sun. So we're going to listen to the Garden of the Sun, just the opening. Harrison he's impossible to describe. He was influenced heavily by Asian music, by Eastern philosophy. He worked with John Cage. He wrote in every conceivable style. He loved to set texts in Esperanto. He was really quite a fascinating character in American music. One of the great composers of the 20th century, a true original, a maverick who created his own music in his own style. And when he passed away a few years ago, it was a tremendous loss. One of his greatest inventions was experimenting in percussion, and he created the American gamelan out of found objects, things like brake drums and compressed air tanks, and he made wonderful music out of this stuff. And some of that is on this retrospective disc. I'll tell you about the other music on it when we're done with Solstice, and then we can sort of summarize the whole process. But let's listen to the Garden of the Sun. This is the opening of the ballet Solstice. Gorgeous, isn't it? Isn't it just like, wow? You listen to that, it is such a fabulous piece. It does have its exciting moments. It's not all meditation and mellowness. It really isn't. But it mostly is. It mostly has that Zen-like, incredibly fluid, trance-like, beautiful melody. I mean, Harrison was a melodist. And he often wrote melodies in which he restricted the intervals he would use, along with his different forms of intonation and tuning. So he created almost his own kind of folk music, in a way, his own kind of primal, primitive expression. And it's unforgettable. So after the Garden of the Sun, you get the entrance of the Moon Bull, who's the bad guy in this ballet. And then there's the battle between the Sun Lion and the Moon Bull. And then there's something called Earth's Invitation. And then at the end of part 1, there is the Vernal Dance. Now, the Vernal Dance, I was telling my friend Vern, I said, Vern, here's a vernal dance. I mean, have you ever heard anything more vernal? It's vernalicious. It's full of vernosity and vernicity and it's just incredibly vernal. And believe me, it's really vernal. Listen, you've never heard anything more vernal. Isn't that the most vernal thing you've ever heard? And that's the end of part one. Now, part two, it's funny how ballets all turn out to be balletic. Part two is, all of the action happens in part one. It's kind of like the Nutcracker. In the Nutcracker, you have the battle with the Mouse King. And then in part two, they go to Candyland and they just dance a lot. And that's where all the sweet stuff comes in. The Nutcracker sweet stuff came from part two mostly, because it has all of the independent dance numbers. Well, part two has dance numbers where all the ballet people do their ballet things, because that's what ballet people do. It's like a vernal dance. The vernal dance is vernal and the ballet is balletic. So you get something called a Saturnalia, and then there's the rekindling of the fire, and then the turning of the wheel, which is it's all tremendously philosophical. Mind-blowingly philosophical, but fortunately it's also incredibly beautiful. And then the concluding dance, the blaze of day with summer triumphant. And I don't have to play any of these. You get the sense of what the thing sounds like. And if you don't own this and listen to it and love it, then all I can say is that you need therapy, because it is such beautiful, wonderful, personal, individual music. Now, the other things on this disc, this retrospective disc on New World, is the first concerto for flute and percussion, which is marvelous because it has lots of percussion. And then something called strict songs. These are based on Harrison's own versions of Navajo poetry, and they are strict in terms of intonation and other things. It's for chorus and orchestra, and it's quite a remarkable piece. Then you get Ariadne, which is also for flute and percussion, and then Solstice. That's what's on this New World disc. Absolutely spectacular introduction to the fabulous, fantastical music of Lou Harrison, who I can't recommend strongly enough. Once you hear him, you may get hooked and want to start collecting stuff, because there's just a huge range of music, but it doesn't sound like anything anybody else wrote. And that's always the hallmark, I think, of a great composer in the 20th century. Back in the classical period, you had to show, what a genius you could be working within the accepted style. Here, as the Romantic period wore on and the 20th century wore on, composers created their own styles. Some of those styles were most unpleasant and unappealing. And of course, we began to place a premium on the originality of style, of music that didn't sound like anyone else's. I happen to think that's kind of a fake originality. But for the composers who were creative enough to do it, it's a true hallmark of originality and of genius. And Lou Harrison was a true genius, a great 20th century composer. And I think Solstice, his ballet, is absolutely the place to get started, to get to know him. So do please pick up this New World recording while you can. I'm so happy that they picked up that performance, and that this material is still available. Who knows how long that will be. It is marvelous, marvelously beautiful, hauntingly beautiful. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you on behalf of me and on behalf of Peepo, my just intonational feline. All the best.